Welcome to the Bucky Weekend Call of September 28 and 29. And we're on the A Fuller Explanation, Amy Edmondson book, and we're starting, it appears we're starting somewhere around, I don't know, I'm very confused, but we're going to start on page 16 tonight. Is that where we left off?
16.
Yeah, we
and
did.
It starts the last paragraph. Fuller placed enormous.
Yeah, which is interesting because I have us reading down through generalized principles down to that paragraph on 921, but that's okay. We'll pick it up wherever the consensus is, and maybe by the time we finish our introductions, Joe will be here. If not, we'll let him holler what it is. Richard, how are you feeling, and what are your intentions for tonight and expectations?
No, I'm feeling pretty good. We had an interesting. I was on the Fuller Trim Tab group this morning, and Joe was there too. But we were reading some of C.J. Farnley's book, and so we got into some of the same kind of questions around certain items. And one of the things that I got out of that particular section that we were reading was what I'm calling a little formula that speaks a little bit to, in my mind anyway, speaks to this self-awareness, otherness. And it's written as A, R with a cap, and B. And R with a cap represents relationship. And it represents relationship in the sense of storytelling that is fictional. Fictional in the sense that whatever our respective stories are, they come out of our sense of relationship with other. And so we construct whatever story that we have in relation to things in our lives, and in effect they're our perception, which is being defined as fiction, I think is what it's all about. And so we have all these relational stories that make up our lives and are important to share with others, because the aggregate of all of our stories ends up in some senses defining our culture, our way of doing things, our way of connecting with each other. But they're all fictional in the sense that none of them are kind of an absolute sort of truth that in a sense bears trying to prove to somebody that my reality is different than your reality, or not that it's different, but that it's more realistic, if you want, than yours. Trying to turn a fictional sort of experience of what life is all about into a nonfiction, sort of an absolute or a static. So I guess in that sense, given where we are, and I'm looking forward to, of course, to get to that modelability section, because the power of modeling is such an important thing now, and it was the argument that Fuller was making, that we must return to the kind of modeling that the chemists were doing at the turn of the old century, and what actually brought the first Nobel Prize to the chemist Van Hooft. And then I have my own connection with the carbon-60 people, and realized that they made their final discovery through a kind of a paper modeling of what this carbon-60 was going to look like, or how it should function, in the sense that it should curve into a circle or a sphere and not just lay out flat. And then I have one other connection that always has intrigued me, that when when Watson and Crick and those just made the DNA discovery, the story that Watson talks about is they made it because they had a picture of what they were looking for, just like a jigsaw puzzle. You've got all the pieces, but you also have a picture, so that helps you put the pieces together. And Watson said that our picture was a geodesic sort of structure, either in nature, but some of it was connected to Fuller's work. And so they went about doing what they were doing with a jigsaw puzzle picture in their mind. And they argued that they made the discovery ahead of a competition, Linus Pauling, because they had the jigsaw picture puzzle, had the jigsaw picture and the parts, whereas Pauling only had the parts. So, and any one of us can sort of relate to how difficult it would be if I had a 1,000-piece puzzle in front of me, but no picture.
Yeah.
And the magnitude of that complexity starts to really sink in.
A perfect metaphor
I'm
of
really
life.
wanting to get to modelability again and have some more discussions on that.
Cool.
Anne, what are you thinking, and what's your expectations?
Yes. Hi. Hello. Yes. Hi, Joe. Good to have you there. I think he's driving. Okay. Okay. First, I want to talk about.
How are you?
Hi. Okay. I want to talk. I want to share what you just said. I just want to comment on what you just said, Richard. The one about these relational stories. Yeah. When you said like these like pulling all these stories together, because an aggregate of stories, right? Because different people come together and we all have our stories to tell, and they're fictional. That really, like, wow, okay, you know, when people tell us stories, half the time we take it as fact. Yeah. Like, okay, this person experienced this, but then there is also that perspective part that generally we disregard, right? And the entire history of the world is based on stories, right? So there is the factual part that you can determine, but that the rest of it, a lot of it is stories. Okay, so it just got me thinking from there. And then just to talk a little bit about last week, I was really happy to go through the universe and generalized principle and generalized principles again. Yeah, because I think through this this is Amy Edmondson, right? Her book, yeah, correct. Yeah, through her, the way she's put it forth makes it even more, because we don't have to grapple with trying to understand the sentence of it all, the meaning of what Baki is saying. To be able to move from here and what to do about it, I think is very, very powerful. So one of the things that came up was leveraging this principle of leverage, and to find out that, I mean, that the idea that it's a scientific generalization, wow, this is crazy. So for me, I'm like looking at leveraging education, right? Because the resources thrown in education is massive, massive. Our country spends about 1.12 trillion ringgit to educate 5 million kids who are right now in school from year 1 to year 11, right? So that's massive. Half of it is spent by parents. That means the government spends half and parents spend another half getting them the things that they feel that the school isn't delivering. So, but then what are we producing? So, and there's no leveraging. There's no leveraging. The outcomes are getting worse. Okay. And a friend of mine from San Jose, he's the CEO of NeuroSky. He told me, he said the question we need to ask is, which system in the world is more efficient? Okay, so if you like a country that has students spending 12 hours a day studying, and they're at the top of the PISA rating, this list, and another country that spends 6 to 8 hours a day, the children are spending 6 to 8 hours a day learning, and there's also at the top 5, top 10 like that in the world, because the top 10 ranking, they're not that far behind each other. So literally, which country's education system is more efficient? That really got me thinking, and we went down the path of, we kind of put down for parents, because we add quite a number of skills on top of what they're learning from just the academic side. We've got academic and then the interpersonal skills, intrapersonal skills. Then that was the first two that we focused on. Then we added in entrepreneurship, so that's entrepreneur and business skills. We added in the biosphere, so it is also green skills and impact skills. Literally, they're learning 4, 5 big massive skills at one go, and because they're doing it together, linked to the real world, they need only 60% of the time to really be able to get information in. When you study the other way, where it takes you have to memorize, then you really have to spend a lot of time just memorizing, because it's very ineffective. Okay, so anyway, that really got me thinking to actually share this. And education needs to be leveraged. Right now, every country is just throwing too much money and not getting enough out of it, for the kids' sake. Then the other thing that came up was the idea of the physical and metaphysical. And for me, it's just that metaphysical is so much more, but the physical is considered lesser than the physical. So when both are done together, it's so powerful, but they're not at the moment. So let me see what we may need to do about that one. Okay, so Joe, how do you feel, and what would you like to take away today?
Thank you, Anne. I feel fantastic, actually. I've had a really good week. I met a lot of very good people. And even up, to this evening, I got to see some people I hadn't seen in a while, and had some very good conversations. And as Richard had mentioned, we had actually met earlier today about CJ's book. And that was something that was great meaning to me, be able to have those conversations. And the importance of what Richard touched upon, the self and other, and even thinking about how we relate to one another. And that was a theme throughout this week when we were talking about various initiatives to help people, and children in particular, at certain points, that storytelling is a element of convincing people as to what is possible. And not only is the element of storytelling, but also understanding, as Richard had pointed out, the relationships between the storytellers, right? So that there is no one single story, and that how we take that into account and understand the inherent contradictions in our perspectives on the world, and the limitations of our knowing, allow us to kind of listen to other people and recreate something that is better than currently existing. So it was really kind of a very powerful week for me, because they really spoke a lot about specifically collaboration, and collaboration is exactly what I just told you about. It's not necessarily taking our story and imposing it on others. And Anne, I really appreciated what you actually just shared about leverage, talking about that we talked a little bit about AI last week and how that is related to leverage and leveraging a tool in order to actually understand the world better, and to be more effective in how we use our time. But to realize it is a tool and that it's not necessarily it's information. It's not necessarily wisdom. And that's something that actually very much came up as well. And so a lot of this is related directly to how we model our worlds. So I'm really excited. I mean, I've had a really good week, and I can think of no better way to spend the last 15 minutes of that week. I mean, in addition to the first hour. So I'm not, it's not, I'm not ignoring the fact that there'll be another hour 15. But Steve, how are you feeling, and what are you taking away?
Really good. I get that you're fast approaching the midnight hour of the last, the last minute of the last hour of the last day of this week. So I acknowledge that. That's what happens when you're in New York at this time. I appreciate you guys letting me off last week. I went and got in a hot Epsom salt bath, and I slowly recovered. And then over the week, I've listened to the recording from last week, and you guys were all involved in a conversation about consciousness and awareness, and I was just blowing my mind because there's so much in there, and you were doing a pretty good job of chopping it in, throwing this in, and seeing and examining what was there. And I had quite a few thoughts about that. When we talk about consciousness and awareness and mind and brain, those are all essential parts of my book, Extreme Mindfulness. And I've had to differentiate, and I've kind of written up a little chart on some of the differentiations over here that if we want to talk about it, we can. But it's been exciting for me because you guys were asking and answering, providing answers or possibilities of answers to questions that I think are perplexed. They perplex all humanity. Very few people. Most people use a lot of those words, consciousness, awareness, as synonyms, and they're really evolved each other. So I really appreciated the thought during the week for that, and I'm anxious to get into this reading, and I think, Anne, your idea of just starting over again with generalized principles might be just a great way to do it, because whatever is going to happen there is going to lead into the modeling part, which is what Richard's anxious to get into, and it's a natural progression of what we're doing. And then if it's appropriate, maybe I'll throw in some of the ideas. I'll at least throw in some of my differentiations that I've made and a couple of concepts, but I don't know that I'll hijack the conversation by having you guys debate my theory. I'll just throw some stuff out there, and if you want feedback, you can. And maybe at one time when I'm ready to go, I want to make a presentation on consciousness and awareness and what Bucky says and what other people say, and do some differentiation, because without defining those terms, there is no way to talk about any particular aspect of extreme mindfulness. That's what I found. So I'm all excited about this section. When I left you guys, or as I listened to you guys, I took notes on things from your conversation. As I was listening, I was dictating into my phone. So I've got those notes, plus I've got these notes, and I think these kind of relate in some way, but I'm not exactly sure how. And I'm really looking forward to tonight. So let me see. What's that?
I just want to come back to what Anne was talking about in terms of the school education efficiency, effectiveness, and what she described, and tying it to the leverage question principle. When she said that one of the things that you try and do in education is the academic part. In other words, fill up the kid with whatever they're supposed to know. And then on the other side, there's the outcome. And to some extent, Anne's school is kind of got entrepreneurship as one of the outcomes. And then she talked about having added in the interpersonal, all of a sudden it hit me as the possibility that the difference between what she's doing and maybe some other educational systems is that she's using interpersonal relationship as the lever, and leveraging, if you want, the academic part, and leveraging the output part, what will be turned into a contribution to society type of thing. Whereas the others are using the academic part as the lever, or they're using maybe an outcome as the lever. Maybe it's the examination kind of end of the term. And these are turning out to be inefficient levers. And so she wants to make the argument that if you want to leverage sort of optimum leveraging of those three things, the answer from her experience is leverage the interpersonal, and you'll get the academic out of it, and you'll get the outcome out of it, and and you'll get them both more efficiently than if you were trying to lever one end or the other.
Yeah, I think, I think that this is a really important point, because if you look at it, it's a state, it's a current state, an event, and a future state. And what happens is if you do that in isolation or in an echo chamber, that actually is a very negative outcome, in the sense that you don't have the interaction between the self and the other. So this is where the is plural minimum too, but I mean, there's a self and other. So the event that you have two different individuals in their states coming together, as opposed to being, kind of divided into parts.
Yeah, and that's to me where you're leveraging the in-betweenness.
And that's correct. And so you're taking the interaction, which is the relationship between those, and it's the in-between the parts, the self and the other, that actually creates something that is of meaning. So I mean, this is not totally dissimilar to some of the even graphs, the hypergraph the image that I put in there about 2 weeks ago. And there's other AI models that actually that provide very similar models to what Richard was talking about. And you add the elements of time in there and things like that, but there's state, event, output, essentially, and how those then state, event, output for someone else. And this is where you have non-simultaneity, and how they're overlapping, and how there's something then comes together and emerges something better. And right, that is like kind of the collaborative form of education, as opposed to, I'm just taking a test, and I'm taking a test in order to score, as Richard was saying a moment ago, the exam. And I'm taking this test to score and to show what information I can regurgitate, as opposed to looking at what's the reason I'm doing this for in the first place. What is the relationship between me and this exam, and what is it doing, and what is it creating? And so that's an important distinction to be able to make when we're actually talking about it from an educational perspective. Too many times we're focused on the object and not the interaction. And so,
well, it comes back to the principle. I mean, to me, the focus out of what we've been talking about is leverage. and so I have an image in my hand in terms of a long pole, let's say, and do I put the pole under the academic rock, under the outcome rock, or under the interpersonal rock? And my image now is to say, I want to put the lever underneath the interpersonal, and I'm going to get better interpersonal out of it, and I'm also going to get better academic probably out of it, and I'm going to get better outcome in the sense of the entrepreneur's contribution to society. So again, I don't know if it makes sense for Anne in terms of when she's got supporters or skeptics, and you're talking about leverage, to be able to use that little image of saying, yeah, okay, where do we put the lever? Under the academic, under the interpersonal, under the exam or the outcome? And I don't think it'll take very long for people to say, oh my God, I think maybe the best leverage in is going to be in the interpersonal. And it also fits for me in terms of her saying, little kids don't sit still. Little kids are always experimenting, and life is a little bit messy in the classroom, but they're alive and interpersonally using their own leverages. And we want to take that leverage away from them by telling them to sit still in the class and regurgitate whatever it is they're supposed to learn. Yeah, this is exciting in terms of the principle of leverage. Yeah.
Well, last week, you guys, the question came up whether if AI had anything to do with leveraging human awareness and human knowledge or something. And there was a discussion. I was convinced absolutely that AI will leverage human knowledge. The whole concept is that large language models create more opportunity or more potential understanding than small language models, and each human brain is a small language model. The idea of putting more circuits in a computer than we have in our brain and being able to collect more data in the computer and look at all that data in 2 minutes, where a human being might take 3 or 4 hours to look at a portion of that data, that somehow AI in that sense leverages human knowledge.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is that AI is the lever.
Yeah.
AI is the extension of my hand or the extension of my brain.
Right.
And so I use it as a tool in order to get more out of what I normally would get just by handwork.
Right.
And just like the computer is a leveraging tool, I can write a lot faster.
Yeah.
And now if AI comes in and it writes the opening sort of paragraph or all the the necessary introductory material,
Right.
and then that frees me up to get to the depth of what we want to say. And I guess part of that is in this in the simple business letter sense of how do you start the letter, and what do you say in terms of opening greetings, and then you get to the real paragraphs that you want to write.
Right.
So AI is going to do all that other stuff for you.
Yeah. And it'll even refine the part you want to put in there.
Yeah, right.
You know, you can say, well, bottom line, what I really want to say is this. Give me 3 ways to say that. And it'll spit out 3. This last week, I saw a podcast it's called the All In Podcast. I don't know if you guys know this, but it's like 4 venture capital dudes. They invested in Facebook, in Google, in Tesla. I mean, these guys have been around for 25, 30 years, and they're pretty well off and together. And they were showing the latest AI, which actually everybody's concerned about the hallucinations. So now this particular, then the structure they're adding on it, I wish I had the terms in my head. In fact, I'm going to go back and listen to it. I noted it, and I'm going to pull the script out. It's quite a bit over my head in terms of terms I'm usual, but you ask it a question, and then it actually breaks out like, okay, to answer this question, here are the things I'm going to need. Boom, 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 boom. So instead of just going out into a cloud and gathering all this information and doing the calculation and spitting out some result, it actually lists the data and the steps it's going to go through. And then each one of those steps, it has a little purpose statement or analysis statement. And as it goes to that, so you as the operator of the AI know exactly what it's thinking and what its sources are for those thoughts. And that is so profound because you can ask the AI a question, it'll just make a statement, and the AI will be able to point out 5 or 6 different modalities of that phrase that had never dawned on me. That I didn't realize that it was that, that there was that much to the topic, just like this topic of consciousness, awareness, and mind. And I mean, there's just so many aspects of that I'm not familiar with. So that's cool. Joe says he's going to be right back. So, so he will be right back. Let me see. So maybe we just can just tackle the reading. I've been taking notes during this whole thing, and I just keep taking notes. Okay, cool. So
Get to the page.
all right. I see share sound, and we'll go over here. And what happened to the book? That's interesting. I had the book up a minute ago. Oh yeah, it's in the PDF rack. There we go. Okay, so okay, there we go. And let's see here. We're going to go. Joe said we should start here, but
I'm looking at even our discussions right now, and what Anne was suggesting going back. I would go back to the universe section and start at, because this is, I think, what got us going last week.
Yeah.
And start at 30110 and then move in, because this is where you get this consciousness and awareness and apprehension issue.
okay. Gee, I hate to leave any words out though. Okay, good. Let's start it.
It start like that he willingly dissects his own long-winded definition, or you could start up where you
somewhere in here.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I really like, I mean, this whole concept universe is all that isn't me and me. It's like he had to speak in some kind of limerick in order to pose the problem, because that's I get it on the one hand, universe is all that isn't me and it is all that is me. But he had to leave out some words here, and it kind of breaks his stumper. But Fuller would never leave it at that. He's indefatigably fatigability anyway, thorough. I don't know. I actually pronounced that word at one time. Einstein revolutionized our understanding of universe, explains Fuller. Prior to his relativity theory, we could think in terms of a single frame, simultaneously complete picture, unimaginably vast, but still simultaneous at any event moment. This understanding must now be replaced by a scenario concept. This is the 301.10. Right. Universe is the aggregate of humanity's conscious, apprehended, and communicated, non-simultaneous, and only partially overlapping experiences. Any comments there?
Yeah, well,
I see a whole bunch of Venn diagrams. This is my universe, this is your universe that overlaps here. But my universe only laps through a library with Einstein, but nonetheless it's overlapping. I see all these universes converging in some Venn mess. What do you see?
Yeah, well, that's what he was talking about too, only he used the example of our ancestry and saying that my life kind of overlaps with my parents' life and with my grandparents' life, and that you see that sort of heritage continuum through this partially overlapping experiences. Yeah,
and definitely non-simultaneous is a good word.
Yeah, because then he uses the example of the the sighting of a star in the evening that looks like it was simultaneously, but as he says, it may have taken 100 years to get to you, so that star might not even exist anymore.
Right. And
So it
I
wasn't
noticed
instant.
he says apprehended and communicated. Now, is communication a requirement? I mean, if I apprehend a universe and don't communicate it, is that part of the aggregate of humanity's universe?
Well, it's just sitting there waiting to be communicated, so it's there.
Aha. So the communication is not a requirement. I don't have to apprehend it and communicate it for it to be part of the universe. I can apprehend it and keep it quiet, and you'll never know what I apprehended. And still, that's part of the universe?
Well, that's part of what isn't me. Well, it's part of what's me, I guess. That's
Even
it's
though you apprehended it and didn't communicate it to me, that's part of universe.
yeah,
How
Yeah.
do I,
Yep.
it's part of the me in
how will I
universe.
discover it? Yeah, but it's part of the you me. It's not part of the me me. You
Oh yeah, well,
apprehended it. What?
then if I communicate it to you,
But if you don't communicate it to me, does that still count as universe?
yeah, because it's inside
Yeah.
you. It's part of
No, it's
you.
in. Okay, we're confused with the word you. Richard apprehended an idea and did not communicate it to Steve.
Right.
So as Steve is what Richard apprehended and did not communicate part of Steve's universe.
Yeah.
My
Yes,
gosh,
I think it should be. Yeah.
even though he didn't communicate it, no one
Yeah.
else may ever know it.
Yeah. Because the universe is all that isn't me.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's scary because I would like to know my universe. I feel like a kid in a dark bedroom and there's something in the closet and I will never know what it is. It's terrifying. Okay. 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 All right, good. So who wants to read next?
Why don't you take that on, Steve? Because you started it.
Okay, I'll finish this page. He willingly dissects his own long-winded definition. Long-winded. To Fuller, aggregate implies a complex that cannot be comprehended in totality at only one moment. Consciousness means awareness of others. 302.
Yeah, you
And
have to read
of
the next part.
otherness. What?
Yeah, you need to finish that paragraph to you get the
Okay,
full
below
sense of,
on page 15.
yeah.
To be apprehended, information must first be within the range of human perception and then actually be noticed. So noticing has something to do with this.
Yeah, well, it has to do with what you were talking about earlier about the cloud going by that you didn't notice.
Yeah,
You called it aware. You weren't aware of it, but there's another word, notice.
yeah,
Um,
that
and
becomes a key.
and the other word that's also in there about that to me is the um, well, it's apprehension because if you didn't apprehend the cloud going by you, then um, you were maybe conscious of it, but you didn't actually apprehend it, or you didn't notice it, or you weren't aware of it. Now all these words come in to describe.
Exactly. So is noticing the same as apprehending?
But I would say, out of the way this is being described, I would say it is. Yeah.
Yeah, noticing equals apprehending. Okay, cool. Okay. To be apprehended, information must first be within the range of human perception. So there's
That's the
perceiving,
sensorial part.
yeah. And actually must be noticed. Communication means informing self or others. Non-simultaneous means not occurring at the same time. Okay, events of universe are instead partially overlapping, like generalizations.
Generation.
Like generations. Thank you. Like generations. My lifetime overlaps my grandfather's parents, and hers overlaps the life of her grandfather, but I was born long after the death of both my great and great great grandmothers. Such are the events of universe. Every experience overlaps some, but not all other experiences. Okay, I like that. And I would like to also confess my inability to cope with the and the universe at the same time. For Canadians and British people, they talk about going on holiday or going to hospital or going to university. We don't do that in America. We go to the hospital, we go to the holiday, we go to the university. And to get rid of that too is just really hard. Same thing with in discussing universe, but I get it. There's only one universe, and it's not this universe or that universe. It's not the universe. It is universe. I get it. I really like that concept, but man, that is hard to ground in. Okay, who else wants to read?
Well, I can read this other facet.
Okay.
Another facet of the scenario concept centers on the misconceptions of the environment as a static whole. For instance, looking out at a distant star, it's all too easy to think we are seeing it just as it is at that moment, while in reality, the particular star is so far away that its light takes 100 years to reach us. What we're actually looking at is a live show taking place 100 years ago. We are seeing an event that occurred before we were born. Universe is the integral or sum total of all experience. It cannot be unitarily conceived, but as thus defined, it is all inclusive. You cannot get out of universe.
And I particularly like this because instead of saying there are no things in universe, there are only happenings or events. And I had a big epiphany about that on one of our previous calls, and I kind of shared with you that even the Empire State Building is a happening because of 2,000 years from now, it may not be there. And I thought it was a thing at the time, but it was just an event. Okay, cool. Are you back in?
Yeah, that's
call it energy event. Yeah.
Yeah, an energy event. Okay. Then this is where you said you left off last week, but we decided to, Joe, to start from just review last week because the conversation was so enthralling. You want to continue to read, Richard?
Yeah, okay. Fuller's definition avoids imparting a sense of thingness. Part of his effort to encourage us to think in terms of pure principle. Universe is energy, and thought all knotted together by incredibly complicated webs of relationships. It is ultimately impossible to separate the physical and the metaphysical. Both are experience. The scientific principles that govern the interactions of energy events as timeless statements of truth are themselves metaphysical. The line, therefore, becomes even more difficult to draw. This is why Fuller's definition depends on consciousness. Our awareness of energy events defines their existence. We cannot go beyond the limits set by our understanding.
I understood all those words. I'm not sure I understood all the consequences of putting those words together.
yeah. There's quite a bit there. Really quickly, I just want to make a brief comment on what you just said, Steve, because I think that's a point that came up earlier today in the same meeting that Richard and I were in with Kurt McNamara, in this distinctioning, a happening when it comes to language, and in particular. So The idea of something, how happening and temporal nature of, you know, of words themselves. And so the idea that somebody brought up, our story's static. Well, in the written word, yes, but if, it's still temporal, but it is in the sense that it may not, it may be interpreted differently at a different point in time, but it is static. So the written word has become something that's static versus dynamic, which is the spoken word, and how that relates directly to storytelling and how we interact with each other. I was just thought that that was important to mention because we're now talking about something like versus dynamic versus static systems, and adaptable systems, and ones that are not adaptable. So when we're talking about modelability and things along those lines, a lot of these concepts are absolutely, kind of important, and not only important as far as also understanding, events and what a happening actually is, because I had some epiphanies with that as well when I was looking at this in terms of language and the ephemeral nature of language.
Okay. Any other discussion points? Okay. I think we finished that paragraph there, right?
Yeah.
All right. Whoops. Finally.
Yeah, so then finally Fuller assures us that the definition is complete. People say to me, I think you've left something out of your definition of universe. That statement becomes part of my experience, but never will anyone disprove my working hypothesis because it will take experience proof to satisfy me. And the experiment will always be part of the experience of my definition, ergo included. So that comes back to what you were saying earlier. Well, what if somebody apprehends something but doesn't communicate it? It's still in that person, so it's part of the. If it's in me and universe is me and all that isn't me, then it's inside me, and it's there, even though it hasn't been communicated elsewhere. Or if it's, as Steve was using the example, if he's the me, then I'm part of all that isn't him.
Yeah.
And what I've kept secret or haven't communicated yet is in me, and so it's part of universe.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't share it before you pass, you're going to be stingy.
Yeah.
Well, and there's also, but there's a real link to education in general, and just even this is something part of the dialogues with Socrates, how kind of Socrates leads one of the in one of the dialogues leads someone to actually a geometric proof based off the fact that he's just questioning someone, but that the knowledge is there, it's internal, but that the knowledge, while it's internal, it is just being kind of revealed to the individual. So it's actually whether knowledge is actually internal to us or external is really kind of one of those deep questions, because, and especially you can even link this to things like the ideas of universal grammar, or a constructivist approach to learning. And we talked a little bit about Piaget versus the Chomsky approach, to learning, or how language is actually formed in our minds. So
But
anyway,
if we
all this
keep
is
this
internal.
leveraging, staying with that leveraging principle, and that whatever it says that you have to be able to perceive something or see something. So it's
Correct.
like I can see that the rainbow range of colors. We were talking about that before too. And at one point, one of the leveraging is I'll just use my example is the X-ray. Now that we have an X-ray machine, it's a lever that allows me now to see something that I normally can't see. But now I can get a picture, an X-ray picture, and I can see inside the body, and I can tell whether a fracture is a fracture or whether it's complicated or simple. And so I think that's the other thing that we're talking about in terms of the leveraging of things like AI, leveraging of machines that allow us to see some of that electromagnetic spectrum that normally a human can't see. Some animals
Well,
can see many more color spectrum than say a human can.
correct. I mean, and I think that this was actually covered pretty nicely on our Wednesday conversation as well, when Wayne actually played that clip, when the child could actually see the rainbow and the matter of perspective and position and how that actually factored in. But technology provides us, yes, with more insights, but it doesn't provide us an insight as to somebody's perspective. So it may give us a more accurate depiction of reality, but it doesn't necessarily tell. Collaboration and interactions are still important as far as our developing our a deeper understanding of the world.
Yeah,
so
we're just talking about what constitutes a leverage. Yeah.
right, and leverage is done in many different ways. I mean, obviously, and they have different tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what was the old movie about the scissors man? Yeah.
Edward Scissorhands, yeah, with Johnny Depp. That was way back in the early '90s.
I was definitely born then and around. Okay. I want to come back to this idea. Universe is energy and thought all knotted together. Now, I would have thought that thought is energy. So it's kind of interesting that Amy pulls that together here. It seems to me she pulls the word thought out of thin air because she's been writing about universe and energy events and stuff, and all of a sudden she throws in the word thought. Any feedback on that?
No, well, the big thing for me is the other half of the sentence, and it comes back to what Anne was talking about in terms of the interpersonal, so the dynamic in education.
Right.
And to me, that last part underscores why you would want to leverage the interpersonal or the complicated web of relationships rather than one of the knots.
So to read that part in context, Fuller's definition of voids imparting a sense of thingness, which we've discussed, part of his effort to encourage us to think. She now brings the word thought into this. Think in terms of pure principle. Universe is energy and thought all knotted together. And I agree, the knotting is created by the complicated web of interrelationships. But suddenly she just picks up the word thought and throws it in. Nobody has any feedback on that word thought, eh? I mean, is thought energy or not?
Well, I mean, thought as far as thinking about it in terms, are you talking about the spoken word being a thought?
No.
She just says universe is energy and thought, all knitted together, knotted together.
It's energy and thought.
I mean, it seems to me that the brain uses energy to think a thought. It also appears to me that the thought itself is energy, whether I'm thinking it or not. The question is, am I
Well,
bringing my
that,
brain in alignment with the energy of that thing,
right.
a thought, and thus have a thought?
This is tuning in and tuning out, though, right? And at that point, that it
Exactly.
exists, that it exists, but then you're just whether you're tuned in or tuned out is different. So that distinction is so it's there. I mean,
So a
it's
thought can be
and
tuned
Yeah.
in, or a thought can be tuned out.
Well,
it's
no,
but
no. I think
it
that I
also
think the
it's
other
not
thing
just
you're
tuned out. It's
looking
not
at.
just tuned out. It's more than that. It's
No.
the fact that she's capturing the whole. It's she's capturing the whole of what is, because if you're tuning in, then you're dividing, right? Because you're tuning in, you're dividing to then multiply. Like you're saying, this is a thought, this is energy. That's a division between two concepts,
Does a thought
right?
exist
But
if it's not tuned in?
We'll have to go back and see what he says about thought, because he thought, my recall is that he's saying thought in a tetrahedral sense is something that's um, that's relevant to whatever is important, and you tune out all the rest. So it's you sort of, it's not, you're not tuning out the thought, you're tuning out all the irrelevancies of whatever that thought is registering.
it's being tuned in relationship to something else.
No, not necessarily. I'm
So
just saying.
thought. So there's that, because that's an idea of self, right? You have a thought, right? This is the thinking. This is not necessarily just our instinctual. This is a thought, and a thought is in relationship to self and other. So that's the way I'm seeing it as
Well,
as
that
well.
may be, but the other part of thought is, if we could go back and find it, but is this idea of tuning out all the irrelevancies around whatever that thought is for you.
Well,
But that's relative.
I just cheated and looked at the
Definition, right? I mean, you checked online, right?
yeah, here's the concordance. And I've checked, and we're going to hear about thinking and thought between page 37 and 39.
Oh,
So I guess we can limits of resolution as part of the whole systems approach. And those are the 3 pages that go through thinking.
Yeah.
So
okay,
we'll put the conversation on hold.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a note in my book to look to page 37 through 39 to get an answer to my question.
yeah, and I also have some scientific discussions on this as well. I just went online to have a look. It says that one theory is that thoughts are a form of electromagnetic energy. This is supported by the fact that the brain emits electrical signals when it is thinking. These signals can be measured by using EEG and other techniques. Another theory is that thoughts are a form of quantum energy. And then here are some additional thoughts on energy of human thoughts. Thoughts can be seen as a form of information, and information is also a form of energy. The brain uses a lot of energy, and this energy is used to process thoughts. Thoughts can have an impact, a physical impact on the body. For example, they can affect our heart rate and blood pressure, etc. They even talk about having spiritual impact. So it'll be interesting to see what Bucky has to say about it. So what page is that on later on?
Yeah, I think in terms of what Joe and I have been discussing, I think page 32 speaks to thinking isolates events, and it also has to do with interconnecting them. So I think we'll the two of us, in terms of what we've just discussed, will be on the same page when we read it in page 32.
Okay, Anne, did you get your question asked and answered?
No, I was just sharing, kind of that out there, there's some definitions of it linking to energy, but I would like to see what Fuller has to say.
Yeah,
It'd be interesting.
well,
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Actually, we read through that and we didn't pause on the word thought,
Cool.
whether it's energy or not. Yeah.
I forgot so are we all complete then at this point?
Yep.
All right, and did we finish this page then? Finally, Fuller assures
we
us that the
did.
definition complete.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, because somebody tries to trick him with a trick question, he says, I got you covered. Want to continue reading? At least through the end of this?
Well, no,
Okay.
yeah, I think we should.
ahead.
I'll be back on in a minute. No, I mean, but I just looked up, the distinction, thinking and thought.
Well,
And
just to
then-
finish it up, he elaborates in a 1975 videotape lecture entitled "Everything I Know." Someone might ask, well, what about dreams? I think you left that out. And I reply, no, for that is
I
part of
remember
your experience. He seems to have all the angles covered.
Cool.
So yeah, so it's not totally dissimilar and divorced from what we were talking about just a moment ago, versus the thinking and the input and the output. So, basically how we look at ourselves as in states. So you are a current state, an event, and a future state. So you're thinking, the thinking is an event, and then the future state is you, and that's the thought. So the thought is basically a state. The thinking is an active process. So that you're thinking, then your future state is now what you think about, is about to what you think about the world. So, I mean, I think that this is like kind of one of those important distinctions. It's actually walking us through the process of what events are. And so, and it's part of that, kind of our transformation, so to speak. But Anne, what you also talked about as far as what thoughts were, and how, I mean, both of the definitions that you used are very important. But one of the things I brought up, I think it may have been here last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, the conversation I had regarding causality. This is the idea, like kind of when we're starting to think about these things, we get into causality. What is causing it, right? Where do things start, right? And from that perspective, that becomes, that becomes also very important. So we even talked about in terms of, electromagnetic waves being, kind of the cause. Then we were even, if we want to even relate this back to what was the, we had a discussion on a Wednesday call. Anyway, about essentially how light, the man who understood the universe was
Walter Russell.
Walter Russell, thank you. Name was escaping me for a minute, but we talked about the idea of light and how that was like kind of how that was cause and effect and within those discussions. But anyway, both of those discussions and or both those definitions are important, especially when we're talking about it in terms of information theory as well, what you had also brought up.
Okay. Who's next to read? Anne?
Okay. Generalized principles. The principle of leverage is a scientific generalization. It makes no difference of what material either the fulcrum or the lever consists, nor do the special case sizes of the lever and fulcrum in any way alter either the principle or the mathematical regularity of the ratios of physical work advantage. Mind is the uniquely human faculty that surveys the ever larger inventory of special case experience stored in the brain bank. From time to time discovers one of the rare scientifically generalizable principles running consistently through all the relevant experience set. Shall I just go on the next
Well,
paragraph?
I have a comment there.
Okay.
He defines mind
Mm.
as uniquely human, and yet I've heard the term mind of God, mind of clear light, my mind, God's mind. He's saying mind is the uniquely human faculty that surveys even larger inventory of special case experiences stored in the brain. So it's like the brain is the refrigerator, and the mind are the hands that are going through the refrigerator sorting the food. I guess. What about the mind of God? I
Well,
guess
for
that's
some, you
outside.
see, this is the whole thing. I don't think he doesn't visualize God in a material sort of sense, like
I got that. He has a
human being.
cosmic sense of godness.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've thrown as much monkey wrench as I can into this conversation so far. Where do we want to go from here?
Okay, I'll continue a
Well,
couple more paragraphs here.
No,
Which-
yeah, I mean,
Oh,
no, you can continue going because I did have some thoughts on this, but I'll save
Oh.
them actually.
Why don't you go ahead first, Joe, then?
You know, as we were talking about mind there a moment ago, is that what our mind is as far as how it we're talking about intention. That's what's uniquely human about what Bucky is saying. So this idea that we're not even able, that the mind that we're able to forecast something that is going to happen in the future. And so then we're able to say to ourselves, well, what is it then? I'm bargaining with the future, so to speak. So I have an idea someday that I'll die. And this is consciousness. And this is what I think would be uniquely human. And what he's saying is uniquely human in a way. And this is my interpretation. We realize that we're going to die in the future. Therefore, we can decide how we want to live in the present and what is truly meaningful. And you're coming to an idea of what intention is. So you're forming an intention. And the ability to predict and shape objects in the world is something that is pretty uniquely human. So, I mean, there's that aspect of it that's actually kind of really important when we're talking about this idea of what does it mean to be conscious? Because, well, then you can be intentional. And then what does it mean to be intentional? Well, you want to be intentional about, of kind of making the world work for everyone else. I mean, essentially that's for everyone. For 100% of humanity, all of that's based on intention. that's based on the idea that you're able to forecast and understand that something is in the future. So anyway, that's my thought, my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really what was intended, but I think that when I had a conversation about consciousness not too long ago, we're talking about it in terms of forecasting. Well, when you start to forecast something, there are even, my friend actually used the example of a spider that's able to plan and even forecast the move of its prey. And that is a way of kind of like, but the idea that the spider is actually going to understand that it will die someday, then that's something much deeper where it starts to think about, well, wait a minute, I'm not just here to eat this thing. I'm here for something that's deeper than just eating and reacting. I'm here to look at the relationship between myself and others. And so and to appeal to something bigger than myself. And if you're appealing to something bigger than yourself, this is where I argue that ethics is the higher level of consciousness. So our ability to understand ethically how to interact with each other, that's the way we, well, as my one would say, govern our governance system. I'd say it a little differently, but that's one way. And that's how we're using that as an appeal to, why am I giving up something at this particular moment in time? It's to create meaning in the future. So maybe the spider doesn't necessarily just eat its prey because it's thinking about something not in that moment, but rather 100 years from now. and now obviously spiders don't think like that, but that's what we do.
Yeah.
Can you prove
George,
that spiders don't think that way?
Well, I mean, I don't, I mean, put it this way, they're not shaping objects in the world
yeah.
that in a way that where they're thinking 100 years out, I would say.
Yeah, not do they do what you just said. I really like this, that we are conscious that we will die and therefore we can decide how we want to live. Yeah, animals don't think like that. Yeah.
Right. And so there's a greater responsibility that comes along with that. And that responsibility is essentially ethics.
Yeah, and I don't think they think in terms of death as well. It's more an instinctive thing to protect, but then I don't think they even know that if they don't protect themselves, they will die. I'm not sure. Just putting it out there, but I like this.
Yeah. So, yeah, but at the very least, it's about bargaining with the future. And that's where language comes in, because language takes thoughts and ideas and concepts and allows us to actually, if we're more precise in our concepts in our language, the better we are able to predict, the more that our senses are able to perceive. It's not that there aren't any blind spots, but it is an ability to accurately capture reality so that we're able to then predict what's going to happen in the future. So it comes back to this idea of cause and effect, and language is an essential part of that. That's why a lot of people feel like language is what makes us human too, because it allows us to communicate with the ideas and synthesize ideas, then to come up with something that actually captures reality in a way that allows us to act or not act. And action should be determined based on our ethics, that would be wisdom. So we understand that this is how the ideas of information, knowledge, and wisdom, if we're making that distinction, is first we get the information, we're able to process it, but then we have an understanding of how things work and we're able to manipulate objects in the world. But wisdom is to be able to actually know when to make an object and when not to make an object. So why am I doing this in the first place? And what's this higher level ideal that I'm appealing to? So this is where theories of kind of information is just information the way it travels. These are signals. And what are we doing with those signals? And this comes back to the signals of tuning in and tuning out. Right.
Well,
So
you're
we're
also
getting,
speaking of an underlying assumption that's in what you've said about prediction. There's an assumption that prediction is.
well, you're talking about inductive reasoning versus deductive,
No, I'm talking about
or abductive reasoning.
I'm talking about being able to predict.
Well,
One of the things I think is the whole question of if I can put enough parts together, I can predict what's going to happen in the to some circumstance or event. But if we're working off the principle of the whole is more than the sum of the parts, then I can't come up with enough knowledge of the parts and assessment of parts in order to make a so-called prediction.
Well, that's Hume's whole argument with this idea of, I mean, this is the basic argument of the problem of induction. All the past events doesn't necessarily mean that the next event is actually going to occur.
Yeah.
So therefore I don't have the whole, right? So if I don't have the whole,
I know that, but when we use the language of prediction, it traps us into thinking that we are able to come up with the conclusion of what's going to happen.
Well, it's probabilistic.
Yeah, well, that's a different word, and probably the better word than prediction.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, you can predict, and it could be right or wrong, which is basically saying I'm predicting this, but it's, well, if you're right or wrong determines, whether or not the prediction was true or not. So you're not saying I'm certain that this will happen.
Oh, but prediction prediction implies certainty.
I wouldn't think that. I wouldn't say that. When I hear a prediction about the weather, I don't necessarily look at it as certainty.
Well, when you say weather, Joe, you automatically put it into a realm of non-predictability. But there are things that are predictable.
Not 100%, though.
To a high degree.
A high degree, absolutely.
Well, that's the problem that I've run into in terms of prediction. The qualifier will be in there that, well, prediction is only up to a certain level. It's not perfect. And yet when we operate off of the principle or the assumption of prediction, we then erase the uncertain part of it and round it off to assume that it is absolute.
Yeah, that's where I get off. I'm with you on that, Richard. I get
and
off
and that's Bucky's definition of generalized principles, is that they have proven to always be true.
Yeah,
correct. True. And that's in CJ's book, actually, pretty interestingly enough, covers that very topic when it comes to ignorance. Hang on, I'm leaving this one.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, the reason
CJ
I get on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just drop that link in the chat really quickly where he talks about the distinction between Hume and Bucky a little bit, because that is an important one to cover, to think about.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay, I've been making notes and doing some cross-referencing, and I'm confused. I think we've read this paragraph, right?
Yeah, last week, yes, we read this.
Yeah.
Do you want to read it again?
Yeah, have we read it yet tonight?
No.
No,
Oh, let's read it.
This we stopped after last week. We stopped after this chapter. I mean this paragraph. Fuller spoke frequently and ponderously on the generalized principles. Those statements, be they verbal or in the shorthand of mathematical equations, that have been proven to always hold true. In other words, generalized principles are rules with no exceptions, from the simple, the mechanical advantage followed by leverage, to the highly profound E equals mc squared, equating matter with energy and quantifying the rate of exchange. These principles taken all together describe universe. Applying a generalized principle in a novel way is called invention. In the broadest sense, synergetics is the search of generalized principles. Design science is the application, as will be discussed in chapter 16.
Cool.
So do we want to continue the reading or?
Okay. Did you invite me to read? Fuller
Yep.
placed enormous stock in these principles and saw humanity's role in the universe as a discoverer and utilizer of the progressively uncovered truths. Which is very interesting because evidently an undiscovered truth is also part of universe, even though it hasn't been apprehended by any human being.
right.
So generalized principles exist whether they're observed or not, and whether they're communicated or not.
Right.
Endowed with minds, as distinct from brains, which merely coordinate sensory input, humans are uniquely able to survey successive experiences and detect reliable patterns, thereby discovering over time such subtle workings of universe as gravity. Utterly invisible and unpredicted by the investigations of separate objects, gravitational force represents a profound discovery and is certainly without exception. Man, I must have read this paragraph 3 times and I'm still reading something brand new here. Any comments up to this point? We're turning the page. Okay. Go ahead.
Carry on.
More remarkable still, human mind was able to express the magnitude of in this force in precise terms. F equals G M small m divided by r squared. And that's a number 10, and that's probably in an end note here in the thing. If somebody wants to, he puts the end notes in a weird place. For me, I mean, they're just, I have to go looking for them. Does anybody know what 10 is referring to?
Oh, it's at the bottom.
Yeah, give me a minute. Yeah, it's at the end of each page. That's where she puts them. At least she did earlier.
Well, they're not, I don't think it's here. Let's look. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Oh, here I've got.
Why didn't I see that?
Yeah, so the attractive force due to gravity between two objects is equal to the gravitational constant G times the product of their masses and divided by the separation distance raised to the second power. So,
cool. No other comments or questions? I'll finish reading the.
Yeah, this is. I mean, you can talk about this paragraph forever. Oh God.
Okay, a fantastic leap beyond sensory-based information. This discovery places tiny humans in contact with the great universal motions. That the human mind is able to detect eternal truths amidst special case experiences, explains Fuller, is the wealth of humanity in our hope for the future. Many of these universal laws are widely known and applied, as for example, the principle of leverage. But other equally reliable truths are all but completely unfamiliar, such as the geometric discoveries described in this book. Fuller convinced that an inventory of yet to be explored applications had the potential to solve humanity's problems, was the ardent champion of unfamiliar principles. Universe is thus the total web spun by all the generalized principles and their interaction. So he just expanded the definition of universe
Mm.
because generalized principles have not yet been discovered. And yet they're part of universe. That's interesting.
Yeah, because the definition of universe is what is known. Yeah, all that is known.
Well, and what he said before, all that isn't me and me, right?
Right. That's the whole.
Yeah, so that's on page 14. Universe is all that isn't me and me. And now we got to hook in the fact that universe is thus a total web spun by generalized principles and their interaction, whether they're known by us or not.
Mm. That's interesting.
Yeah. And makes it suddenly more complicated than it was before we started this phone call. For me.
Mhm.
And I've got to refer back over to page 14. And I'm going to put this page 17A. Okay, thank you for letting me remember my little notes. As rules without exception, they are necessarily interaccommodative. Fuller's terminology takes some getting used to. Eternally regenerative universe is an ongoing event governed by the omni-interaccommodative complex of unique and eternal generalized principles. Wow, so somehow universe is not just little Venn diagrams of people's personal experience. It's suddenly an ongoing event governed by the omni-interactive.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. Somehow that's got me totally confused. I'm not finding it here. It is ultimately, my universe is thus. Oh, okay, good. I'm on another page. Okay, good. Now I'm better there. All right. Okay, then
This
I'll come
last
back to that.
paragraph
I'll
is
later.
actually, yeah,
What's
this
that?
last paragraph. This last paragraph is important.
Universe is thus the total web spun by all generalized principles and their interaction. As rules without exception, they are necessarily interaccommodative.
That's important to know.
Yeah, everything touches everything.
That they're interaccommodated. Yeah, that they're interrelated.
Yeah. And not only interrelated, but they facilitate each other.
That's right. Right. They're
Yeah.
accommodating towards one another.
Yeah.
And when you actually stop accommodating, that causes a disharmony.
Yeah.
That causes actually a friction. Yeah, you're no longer accommodating one another. You're actually working against nature, not with nature.
The Fuller's terminology takes some getting used to. Eternally regenerative universe is an ongoing event governed by the omni-interaccommodative complex of unique and eternal generalized principles. The principle of synergy described in chapter 3 accounts for the incalculable complexity of the whole web despite thorough comprehension by many of the separate parts. And so I suddenly got this, I took a spider web, which is two-dimensional. I made it 3D, filled the universe with a spider web, everything interconnecting, and the incalculable complexity of the whole web, despite thorough comprehension of many of its several parts, I see this energy moving through the web interaccommodatively. Whew. And finally, God is the unknowable totality of generalized principles.
Yeah,
I just got to point out it's almost one. It's
Yeah.
almost one my time here. Sorry.
It's almost won my time
Oh,
here
yeah.
too.
Okay.
Say that again. Minus what?
It's
It's
almost
almost-
one.
It's almost
Two.
time.
Oh, it's almost time. Oh, crap. That's right. Well, crud, we
Sorry.
finally,
Yeah,
we at
don't
least
mean
knock on the
okay.
door of return to modelability. Wow, I had fun tonight.
Mhm.
Yeah. Joe, you put some stuff over here.
Yeah, so that's just CJ's essay when he's actually going through this distinction of you know, when he's specifically talking about what I've talked about here in the past, is this refining of ignorance, but specifically he does get into this how Bucky's essay, which is the wellspring of reality, and how generalized principles are defined by Bucky, and how somebody like Hume is, you know, has this idea of like that there's no guarantee, and then it gets into actually what we were talking about a little bit earlier with prediction. Um, and he actually goes into the essay. I think it's this one. Yeah, it is. That he talks about some of these really poor predictions that where we felt pretty certain um, that we would know the outcome um, and the limits of our knowing.
You want to go
But
ahead and, oh, go ahead.
anyway, go ahead. No, I'm done.
Go ahead and finish up with your takeaways, Joe, if you'd like, while you're talking.
Sure. Okay. So my takeaways today. As always, I'm just grateful to see everybody. That's you know always going to be my main takeaway. And I appreciate the time because I think to some degree I wish I hadn't been in the car for part of it because I would have liked to have actually um, drawn some of my own personal diagrams just to remind myself about some of the concepts that we discussed, we revisited, that I need to revisit. However, we record these, so that's kind of the beauty of that. I just can't stand listening to myself. So, uh, you know, from that perspective, what are my takeaways? My takeaways are really kind of making these distinctions between thoughts, thinking, having, being more mindful with our words and the importance of that. You know, we use things interchangeably that can create a certain degree of confusion as for us to underline, you know, I think about it often how expressing ourselves, and we're using certain words. And sometimes we're even able to reconcile the words that we're using, like thinking and thought. Well, I know what you meant by that, but we're using words imprecisely. So the more we go through these terms and really kind of understand Bucky's thinking, or Bucky's definite, I would say Bucky's glossary, then I would say then we have a better chance of actually communicating more effectively some of these ideas as we hash them out. You know, I just to revisit really quickly, I think the storytelling aspect of things and understanding leverage, thinking about how tools enable leverage, is something we discussed last week a little bit, but I think, you know, kind of revisited this week. It's always important to know, to think about leverage because I think that ultimately, how we use leverage will limit the amount of energy and mistakes that are made in whatever new projects or endeavors that we encounter. So have to use the right tools at the right time in order to have that trim tab effect. So, in any case, the story, and then the storytelling aspect I thought was really fabulous as well. So I had a good time. Yeah, and how do you feel and what are you taking away from today?
Oh, a lot, yeah. And I think the first one was Richard talking about what I'm doing in education, right? And equating them to levers, right? And the fact that most schools using exams and the teaching and the tuition, all those things actually are levers as well. But which one works better? I think ultimately, it's the comparison, you've brought it to a point where it's easy to compare and therefore to decide. Otherwise it's on the ground, we're just comparing and saying, yeah, this is not good, or whatever. But it's not compared at the same level, like brought down to the same denominator, and then you decide which denominator is bigger or smaller, things like that. So I really like that one, efficient being inefficient. So I'm gonna start talking about it like this, rather than because sometimes it can come out as you're critical and condemning of something else that someone is doing. Yeah. So that's really powerful for me. And the other one is Joe bringing in, like what our mind is and what makes us human. I really like that, as opposed to say animals. Yeah. And Steve, we read through the whole section last week, and when you pause thought, I need to think further on it until you ask if that's energy, and then how do we? So isn't that energy? So it's already covered, and it should include thought, right? So that was really powerful for me as well, and I'm looking forward to taking it on further when we get there. Just double check, which week are we not having the call together?
I believe it's next week.
Sorry?
I believe it's next week. I got to check my calendar, but
I won't, let me see, is it next week? I will be here next week.
oh, you will?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna be here next week. It's the week
Let me
after
check
that
my
is when I'll
calendar.
be here.
So I can't recall which one.
Wait, what?
Yeah, carry on.
Hang on, 6. That's it's the 5th, the 6th.
I should be able to join. So right now, because on the 6th, I'm in Jakarta, but I'm not traveling that day. So
the 13th. Wait a minute.
13th. Okay,
yeah.
okay.
I mean, I guess that's the 12th for me.
Yeah,
Mm.
I'll be here on the 5th and 6th, and I will be gone on the 12th and 13th.
Okay, I'll be flying back on that day. Yeah, from Japan here.
So you won't be on the call on the 12th, 13th, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was
12th,
like enough of us weren't going to be here where we were going to skip that week.
Oh, we're gonna skip that week. Okay, good. Thank you. I won't worry about it. All we have to worry about is that Wednesday when I'm gone.
Then that's, and I should be able to cover that.
In fact, I'll be gone the next Saturday as well. So I'm gonna be
Correct.
gone, yeah,
And I'm supposed to cover that Saturday.
okay,
So
yeah. Okay. Wonderful. You want to pass it along then?
Oh, yes. Richard, how do you feel and what is your takeaway today?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. And I guess the big takeaway right now for me is that very last sentence that talks about the incalculable complexity of the whole web, despite thorough comprehension of many of the separate parts. That to me is just another way of saying the whole is more than the sum of its parts. But the real takeaway is that the whole is incalculable. Its totality is incalculable. And even if we factor in the last sentence about God as the unknowable totality, the unknowability is still speaks to the mystery and the more. And so So that's powerful for me to see that more is not something that is actually calculable. Not all of it anyway. And whereas the other assumption that we've grown up on from sort of the reductionist kind of point of view is that if you can know what the parts are and can comprehend all the parts, you can aggregately put them together and you will know the whole. And that's the educational sort of process that needs to be changed, because the 20th century and now into this century has, in a sense, blown up the absolutism of that concept. And yet here we are 125 years into a new century, and no one's teaching, or very few are teaching, that turnaround way of looking at the world. The whole is more of the sum of the parts, and to really understand what that is other than rhetoric. So change is slow, obviously. Anyway, so that's my takeaway. It's just that last sentence that really sort of punched home the importance of the mystery or the incalculability that's in the concept of more than the sum of the parts. Over to you, Steve. How are you feeling, and what are you taking away?
That last paragraph to me also was a real kicker. And it's funny because I've been on the call when we read this twice, and you guys did it one time without me, somewhere in between. So it's like multiple times this has been reviewed, and it seems to me I'm just getting more and more out of it. I'm so grateful each of you are here sharing your perspectives on this. But when we go down through universe and then end up with God, that kind of is a great way to end our conversation for tonight. I'm going to go and think about that. In fact, as I began the call, Richard and I were having, I don't know if this is on the recorder or not, we were having a discussion about consciousness and awareness and mind and brain, and how those terms are kind of so used interchangeably, and not much thought is given to exactly what that process is. And each word seems to have a particular meaning in a particular context. You change the context and all of a sudden a word means something differently. And human beings are totally happy with that. As a human being, I'm totally happy to have 5 different definitions for God depending on my context, or 5 different definitions for consciousness depending on my context. And I'm not aware that I'm overlapping so much. And in my book, I'm doing everything I can to differentiate those words and actually create some kind of formulaic, generalized principle. Because that's the other thing that really blew me away here. Without exception, they are inner accommodative, and they are always true. So I would say that I hear the term mind of God. Just Bucky says right here, God is those generalized principles. And since they're interaccountably calculable, then therefore God's mind must be these generalized principles. And maybe those generalized principles are God. Anyway, these are all the questions I'm going to go to bed and torture myself with tonight. I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful. Okay, we're complete, I suppose. Everybody, no last minute rebuttals? Great.
Yep.
Okay, it is this Saturday, and I guess I'll be here Wednesday and Saturday. So life is good.
Life is good.
Thank
And it's
you.
nice to see
Bye.
everybody smile. Take care. Yeah, just really quick. Yeah, next week I want to definitely catch up with Eternally Regenerative. So,
Cool.
all right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Hope you guys.
Bye-bye.